I think I'm sure people would definitely agree on the complexity side of it in terms of, tying down what somebody's buying in a service, defining it accurately, measuring it, capturing it, making the intangible tangible. There's a lot of complexity around services procurement, but you mentioned it's also quite simple as well. Where do you see that kind of core simplicity?
Well, it's about the data, right? God, I sound awful when I say that. That's what everybody says. These pockets.
Well, I was going to.
But it sort of is, right? It's just about the data and what the data tells you. And I'm not a huge sort of data analytics person, right? But the data tells you what's going on in your organization. And the more data, the better your decisions can be, because you can use that data to help them. So I think it's as simple as that, right? Services procurement is fundamentally about getting the data back out of those deals that you're doing with service providers to then guide you in what your next deal should be. And if you don't look at that, you don't know whether you made a good decision or a bad decision last time. And so how are you going to guide your next decision? And it doesn't matter what the data is, but getting to that data and looking at it and understanding it. And it isn't difficult. It's pretty simple data to get hold of once you understand how to get hold of it, and pretty simple to analyze. You don't need a computer to do it. You can do it almost by hand. So,
yeah, I mean, it's when you break it down like that, the process of buying services, the underlying process, it's not, as my friend always says, it's not rocket surgery. So that process exists. It's not the most complicated thing in the world, and actually the ability to buy service effectively, if you've got the data, if you capture the process, is actually fairly straightforward. But it feels like it's been made very complicated, or people have felt like it's too complicated to try and address, because it's not the same as buying goods and materials. It's not the same as working through that kind of process that's grown from the ERP into the kind of like procure to pay and source to pay world.
Oh dear, we're going off into procurement language.
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit, but it's,
and that's part of the problem in my mind, by the way.
Right.
So it's interesting you say that, and I was partly joking, but also that is part of the problem that I have come across since working in procurement, that there is this language, and then you start talking to the business, the client, who you're trying to help, and they don't know what you're talking about.
But it depends who you're engaging. So if you, would you say that, and we're kind of coming on to the topic I wanted to talk about of like who should care about this. Do you think in the minds of, when you're looking at the business and solving a problem around this, so first of all, let's define what is services procurement. Do you feel like that's a thing that most organizations, if you spoke to the CFO and said, look, I'm interested in looking at how you guys manage your services procurement, do you think the CFO is going to understand what that is? Do you think they're going to have a clear box?
Well, no, they won't. And that's, again, part of the problem, right? Using language that they won't understand. So one thing that procurement's very good at is coming out with their own language and then wondering why their stakeholders can't get engaged, right, or won't get engaged. So, no, I think that services procurement is literally that. It's procurement of services. Everything that's not a physical product is a service. As long as it's delivered by a person, obviously not by a machine, but as long as it's delivered by a person, it's services procurement. So it doesn't matter whether it's a piece of marketing work, a piece of legal work, a piece of audit work, a piece of consulting work, a piece of security guarding work, a piece of some reception manning work. It doesn't matter to me. It's just a service that is being provided by people. And that's the way I look at it, and that's the way I encourage everybody to look at it.
It's funny, actually, because a chap that I've interviewed before, who's a well-known analyst in the kind of like procurement and contingent workforce space, a guy called Andrew Carpy, he always used to very much try and impress upon me, Johnny, it's not services procurement, it's the procurement of services.
Yeah, he's right. That's effectively what I'm saying. It is, because as soon as you try and label it, everybody thinks it's this weird and wonderful, complex thing, which frankly it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously the way that most procurement teams are set up is based around categories.
Yeah,
and that's where
the other problem.
That's where I think you get some complexity as well in the terms of the remit.
Yes.
Of where this kind of spreads.
Yeah, absolutely. again, procurement has, I feel like I'm lambasting the profession here, but, in some cases it needs lambasting because, yeah, absolutely. If you look at things in a category is effectively a silo, but that the business doesn't care about that. Yes, I will appreciate being a procurement professional and consulting on this for a number of years. Yes, there is a great deal of benefit from specialism in a category, having category people who really know how to buy stuff in a category, but that's only one part of the problem for the business. The business problem is, I need this done, I need it done next week, right? And this is my business plan, and these are my objectives, and this is my strategic imperative. I don't really care how you do it, just get on and do it. So procurement has this responsibility to recognize that, say, okay, yes, we have category expertise, but it's a good point because most of the meetings I attend now have somebody from the HR category and from the consulting services category and perhaps from the talent part of the business and from the HR part of the business all in the same room. Otherwise, I don't bother really attending the meeting because we're not going to get very far. We're going to get stuck when we start talking about other services or other parts of the non-permanent workforce, let's call it, where nobody's represented. So you're not going to get the right answer. You're not going to solve the problem.